already febrile situation, now more fuel on the fire. At one of Belfast's peace lines last night, the peace was broken.
There is a specific sound a military makes when it breaks, not the roar of cannons, but the quiet click of 15,000 soldiers turning in their kits for the last time. This isn't a routine retirement. It is a massive vote of no confidence that has left the British Army at its smallest size in over 300 years. While the government in Whitehall scrambles to manage the optics, the truth is bleeding out of the barracks. Our brave defenders are walking away, not because they fear the battlefield, but because they feel institutionally betrayed. As military bases like Scampton and Wethersfield are transformed into high-capacity accommodation centres for unregulated arrivals, the men and women who swore to protect these borders are asking a painful question. Who exactly are we defending?
To understand the gravity of this security collapse, you have to look at the numbers. Since the current administration took office, trust within the military has reportedly plummeted by 66%. We are seeing a systemic abandonment of the traditional soldier in favour of a new politically managed demographic strategy. While Donald Trump warns that the UK is gambling with its defence and handing away strategic assets like the Chagos Islands, the British military is shrinking to a point where analysts suggest we wouldn't last 13 days in a major conflict. This isn't just a budget issue, it's a fiscal responsibility paradox. We are spending £8 million every single day on hotel capacity for undocumented arrivals, while our own warships are being towed to the scrapyard because we simply don't have the sailors to man them.
The most noticeable news isn't just the walkout, it's the treatment gap. We are witnessing a sovereign insult that has turned the streets into a theatre of heightened civil unrest. On one side, you have veterans who patrolled deserts and stormed beaches, now left to rot in mould-infested council flats or facing retrospective prosecution for actions taken 50 years ago. On the other, you have unregulated arrivals who have bypassed every legal check, immediately bussed to 3-star hotels with full board and legal aid funded by the very taxpayers they've displaced. Critics like Nigel Farage are now openly labelling this as demographic gerrymandering, a cold, calculated strategy to replace a disillusioned electorate with a new dependent population.
Why is the Prime Minister paralysed? The opposition warns that Britain is no longer a sovereign nation, but a vassal state of international bureaucracy. By remaining tethered to the European Court of Human Rights, the government has created a legal framework where foreign judges decide who walks the streets of Leeds and London. This legal straitjacket is the reason deportation flights are grounded, while military barracks are requisitioned. The administration would rather bankrupt the Treasury and demoralise the army than offend the progressive lobby. It is a silent coup disguised as asylum policy, and the personnel draining from the barracks tonight are the ultimate proof that the covenant of service is being liquidated.
The soldiers walking away tonight aren't just quitting a job, they are exiting a system that they believe has stopped loving them back. The government can monitor the situation, they can label the dissent as far right, and they can talk about modernisation, but they cannot fight a war with an empty uniform. The curiosity of the viewer shouldn't be about why the ranks are thinning. The reasons are written on every hotel receipt and every veteran's court summons. The internal surrender of Britain is no longer a warning, it is a headline. The invisible eye of the public is open. The question is, who will be left to answer the call when the new normal finally breaks the nation? The last orders for the British military have been called.
Police officers in Birmingham have been attacked with fireworks, fired at point-blank range, as if the city's streets had abruptly become a testing ground for chaos. The first explosions tore through the night with a violence no one anticipated. Bursts of color followed by screams, sharp cracks ricocheting off tower blocks, and the unmistakable sense that something had shifted. And from that moment, the night did not unfold, it unraveled. What began as scattered flashes quickly hardened into a coordinated assault. Rockets were launched directly at officers, sparks hammered against shields. Police vans were forced to reverse under fire. Families watched from behind locked doors as sirens tangled with smoke. The city felt trapped in a moment it had not seen coming, unsure when it would end, and even more unsure why it had begun at all. Yet beneath the noise, a deeper question formed. Why Birmingham, and why now? It was never simply about the fireworks. It was about everything that had been simmering long before the first rocket flew.
To understand tonight's eruption, we must look beyond the immediate clashes and into the wider reality Birmingham has lived with for months. The force policing this city is exhausted. Officers have spoken openly about endless overtime, slipping response times, and equipment that is aging faster than it can be replaced. Britain's front line has been stretched so thin that even routine calls now feel like triage. Birmingham, with its sprawling estates, youthful population, and rapidly shifting demographics, sits at the center of these pressures. Rising youth crime has left officers responding to incidents at a pace they can no longer sustain. Communities dealing with the double burden of economic hardship and migration pressures have become increasingly frustrated. And all of it has accumulated quietly, forming the dry ground upon which tonight's sparks landed. When police issued a Section 60 order granting expansive stop and search powers, it wasn't the beginning of control. It was an acknowledgement of how fragile that control had already become. And so, even as officers pushed back against the firework volleys, the deeper story was already taking shape. Birmingham wasn't simply reacting to violence. It was revealing the conditions that had made that violence possible.
The scenes in Birmingham may feel shocking, but they are rooted in national tensions Britain has been trying to avoid confronting. Over the past year, the country witnessed some of the largest anti-immigration demonstrations in recent memory. Political rhetoric hardened, communities split over cultural, economic, and identity issues, and resentment, once scattered, began to consolidate. In Birmingham, those national pressures became personal. Rents rose sharply, food prices consumed savings, youth services already overstretched struggled to absorb growing needs. Mental health waiting lists lengthened to the point where help often arrived too late. Families found themselves juggling more stress than ever, while young people in particular slipped between the cracks. It is in this environment of uncertainty, frustration, and eroding trust that tonight's events found oxygen. Fireworks did not manufacture instability, they exposed it. Birmingham's eruption was not an anomaly, it was the visible surface of something deeper, the outward expression of pressures accumulating inside communities that feel increasingly disconnected from the institutions meant to serve them. And that truth is perhaps the most unsettling part of tonight's story. The violence was sudden, but the reasons behind it were not.
As the night unfolded, a second realization took shape, one far more consequential than the spectacle of flashing lights and burning debris. Britain's ability to respond to unrest is itself reaching a breaking point. Prisons across the country are at or near maximum capacity, leaving offenders cycling in and out of custody with alarming speed. Court backlogs have grown so vast that justice has slowed to a crawl, and officers, already stretched thin, are left questioning whether the deterrence they rely upon still holds. For criminals, hesitation becomes opportunity. When word spreads that the system is overwhelmed, that consequences may be delayed or even avoided, the boundaries that once kept order intact begin to soften. And when policing becomes reactive rather than preventative, neighborhoods sense the shift immediately. Birmingham exposed this shift in real time. The fireworks were a symptom, the response, or lack of it, was the diagnosis. Tonight's violence spiraled not because officers were absent, but because the structure supporting them could no longer absorb another shock. And that raises a question the entire country must now grapple with. If this is what one night of concentrated pressure looks like, what happens when the pressures grow larger?
In the aftermath, attention inevitably turns to Westminster. But at a time when cities like Birmingham are grappling with rising instability, the political spotlight sits elsewhere, on renegotiations with Europe, on defending migration policy, on budget disputes and party infighting. The distance between political priorities and street-level reality has rarely felt wider. Residents watching the violence unfold want clarity. Officers want reinforcement. Communities want certainty. Instead, they hear familiar phrases about monitoring the situation, statements that acknowledge unrest without addressing the conditions beneath it. It leaves a sense of hesitation at the very moment the country needs decisiveness. And this gap between what government says and what the street feels is where instability grows. Birmingham's eruption is not just a policing failure or a community strain. It is a political warning. If leadership cannot move at the pace of crisis, then the crisis will set the pace for the country.
As the smoke fades and the city returns to a brittle quiet, the true meaning of tonight becomes clearer. Britain is not collapsing, but it is straining. The forces bearing down on the country, migration pressure, economic anxiety, youth unrest, policing fatigue, overcrowded prisons, and deepening political division, are converging in ways that make pockets of instability more likely, not less. Birmingham is not an outlier. It is a preview, a reminder that the line between order and disorder is far thinner than it once was, and that the pressures shaping modern Britain are beginning to surface in unpredictable and explosive ways. So now Britain faces a question it can no longer delay. Was tonight's violence a momentary rupture, destined to fade with the morning light? Or was it an early sign of a country approaching the limits of what its institutions can contain? Because what happened in Birmingham was more than chaos. It was a message. And whether the nation listens will determine what comes next.
Pro-migrant supporters clashed with anti-migrant protesters following a court order in which a hotel in a London suburb will have to evict asylum seekers.
At 9:17 p.m. last night, the British social contract didn't just break, it ignited. While the mainstream media tries to label what is happening in 15 simultaneous cities as isolated unrest, the smoke rising over Tamworth tells a different story. It is the story of a government that has lost control and a prime minister who is choosing to manage the decline rather than serve his people. Last year, 111,000 asylum claims were lodged, the highest in our history. Today, £8 million of your tax money is being spent every 24 hours to house arrivals in 210 hotels across the country. The warning signs were flashing red from Epping to West London, yet the Home Office ignored their own internal memos. Tonight, we expose the data they tried to censor and the reality of a nation at its breaking point. Let's look at the numbers that Whitehall is desperate to hide. Since this uprising began, over 1,800 British citizens have been detained, many arrested simply for being present or shouting in their own streets. Now, look at the other side of the ledger. In that same time frame, how many illegal arrivals, people who broke the law to enter, have been removed? Less than 300. That is 1,800 taxpayers in cells versus 300 deportations. This isn't an administrative error, it is the blueprint of a two-tier justice system. While pensioners are told they must freeze this winter because there is no money, the government continues to fund a hotel strategy that their own civil servants warned would destabilise communities. They aren't trying to stop the boats, they are trying to normalise them, scouting your town halls and military bases for the next new model of...
Why the censorship? Why the pressure on social media companies to delete footage of your own streets? Because Keir Starmer knows that if a family in the south sees the reality of what is happening in the north, the narrative of social cohesion collapses. They are treating the British public not as citizens to be served, but as a population to be controlled. The fire in Tamworth was a warning. It was a symptom of a much deadlier disease, the total erasure of community consent. When you criminalise dissent, you make resistance the only language left. From harassment near schools to the tragic cases reported in Hounslow, the safety of your families has become a secondary concern to the requirements of international human rights courts.
The battle for the soul of Britain has moved from the ballot box to the high street. The government thinks that by arresting enough people and banning enough accounts, the anger will vanish. They are wrong.
You cannot fix a broken contract with a press release or a censorship campaign.
To the viewers who stayed, you are the only variable left in this equation. The media, the politicians, and the police command have all picked their side. Now, you have to decide if you will wait until the coaches pull up in your town, or if you will demand that your country belongs to you. The days of polite silence are over. We will keep showing you the numbers they hide, because a country kept in the dark can never truly be free.